Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question comes to us from the True Stories collection, as in it actually happened at an event that I was actually judging. Amy plays an Urza Saga. Nick wants to disenchant that Urza Saga before Amy taps it for mana. Is this possible? Alright, so I'd like to build my way up to the answer to this question by first considering a couple of warm-up questions with a similar theme. So let's first consider what would happen if Amy had instead played a Sol Grail, and Nick still wants to disenchant that Sol Grail before Amy taps it for mana. Is it possible for him to do that? And in order to answer this question, we're going to need to know a couple of pieces of information. First of all, we're going to need to take a look at the exact text on how you choose a color with Sol Grail. As you can see, the ability says you choose a color as it enters the battlefield. That means that this is a replacement effect. And what that means is that we're replacing the event of Sol Grail entering the battlefield with the event of choosing a color and Sol Grail entering the battlefield. Now, all of this happens immediately before the event that gets replaced would have taken place. So what that means is that there's no point in time at which Sol Grail is on the battlefield for which there's no color chosen for it. The next thing that we're going to need to know is a little bit about how timing and priority works. Basically, anytime you want to do anything in a game of Magic, you're probably going to need to have priority to do that. In this case, the important thing to know is that after a spell or ability resolves, the first person to get priority after that happens is going to be the active player, in this case Amy. So what that means is that Amy is going to be the first person who gets an opportunity to take a game action immediately after the Sol Grail resolves. Because there's already a color chosen for it at this point, Amy can activate that mana ability right now, and that's before Nick has a chance to even play the Disenchant. Of course, even if Nick got priority first, Amy could still just tap the Sol Grail for mana in response to the Disenchant, and she would still be getting the mana out of it that way. So that's the answer to the first question. Nick is not able to disenchant the Sol Grail before Amy taps it for mana. Alright, now let's take a look at another related question. Maybe instead of Sol Grail, Amy is going to have a Chrome Mox. Is it possible for Nick to use a disenchant against the Chrome Mox in such a way that Amy can't tap it for mana? Alright, so this situation is very similar to the previous one in that Amy is still going to be the first person to get priority after the Chrome Mox resolves. She can't just tap it for mana right away though. To see why, we're going to need to take a look at the ability that imprints the card onto the Chrome Mox. As you can see, it uses the word win, and that means that this is a triggered ability. Now, triggered abilities trigger and go on the stack and can be responded to. And until this triggered ability resolves, there's not going to be a color that is associated with any exiled cards for Chrome Mox. And what that means is that even if Amy taps it for mana, that ability is not going to produce any mana because there isn't any color associated with any exiled card for us to choose. That means that if Nick responds to the triggered ability that lets Amy exile a card, then Amy is not going to be able to tap the Chrome Mox for mana in response to that, and she also cannot tap the Chrome Mox for mana at any point previous to that ability resolving, the way she could with the Sol Grail example. So in this case, it is going to be possible for Nick to disenchant the Chrome Mox in such a way that Amy does not get any mana out of it. Alright, now that we've knocked out those first two warm-up questions, we're ready for the final boss question that I introduced at the very beginning of the episode. Let's say that now Amy's playing an Urza Saga, and Nick wants to disenchant that Urza Saga before Amy gets an opportunity to tap it for mana. Is this possible? And in order to answer this question, we're going to need two more pieces of information specific to how sagas work in addition to all the stuff that we had talked about previously. First of all, we're going to need to know how we get the lore counter onto Urza Saga. And as you can see here, Urza Saga just enters the battlefield with the lore counter on it. This is not the exact same wording that we saw on the Sol Grail, however, this does still mean it's a replacement effect, and therefore it's going to be handled exactly the same way. There is no point in time at which Urza Saga is on the battlefield and it doesn't yet have a lore counter on it. The final piece of information we're going to need is to know exactly how it gets the ability to tap for 1 mana. And as you can see here, there's a triggered ability that triggers, and that gives the ability to tap for 1 mana to Urza Saga. Now the wheels are probably turning. Because this is a triggered ability, like what we saw in the Chrome Mox example, the Urza Saga is not going to have any abilities that let it tap for 1 until that triggered ability resolves. If Nick responds to this triggered ability, like what we had in the previous case, then he would be able to disenchant the Urza Saga before Amy is able to tap it for mana. This is exactly the same sort of thing that lets people respond to the Chapter 3 ability on Urza Saga by, for example, tapping it to make another construct token. It's just that in this case, we're responding to the Chapter 1 ability rather than the Chapter 3 ability. There's one more thing that I wanted to tie up before I sign off here. If you're an astute viewer, you might be wondering something. Hold on a second. If we said that that triggered ability triggers when we put a lore counter on Urza Saga, we also said that there was no point in time at which the Urza Saga was on the battlefield and it didn't have a lore counter on it. So could we really say that we put a lore counter onto Urza Saga? I mean, to me, it seems like it was always there. And that's a really valid question. So valid, in fact, that we have an entire rule in the comprehensive rules that specifically spells out what it means to put a counter on a permanent. As you can see, there's actually two cases. One of them is the boring old one where you have the card on the battlefield already and there's no counter on it, and then you put a counter on it. Obviously that would count. However, we also see the case that we have here where it enters the battlefield with that counter specifically called out as something that counts as putting a counter on Urza Saga. And so that's the reason why this does in fact work the way that everybody knows that sagas do work. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.